thank you guys for jumping in and sharing this with us. I'm not usually one to go and talk by myself, but when Carl Grant and their team reached out to me to come be a part of this and talk about education and faith, I thought that maybe this was God calling me to do another thing. If I was to look over my life, wasn't born into a very religious family, but there was lots of things that happened to me as a child that brought me closer to God and started me on my mission. A lot of it started when I became a teenager. I started smoking weed when I was 9 years old. I started drinking when I was 13. And you hear those stories, how can that happen to somebody so young? But I walked through that, I lived through that. I was in a divorced home. My mom had been married at that point 3 times, I believe, married and divorced. And the relationship she was in at that time was very abusive. And he was abusive to my mom, and he was abusive to myself. And the drinking and the drugs and the abuse put me in depression. At 14 years old, I climbed on the freezer in our basement, tied a rope around my neck, and jumped off. I woke up in the hospital alive, and I couldn't figure it out because there was no way that rope was going to break. But for some reason, I was alive. So then I spent the next few years of my life trying to figure out why me, because my life didn't get any better. I continued on down that same path, drinking, doing drugs. By this time, I was kicked out of school. I was at a work camp. And this is only by the time of 15 years old. And then all of a sudden, my best friend died. That was my grandfather. So it spun me down another roller coaster. I came home for the funeral, ended up stealing a car. And that led me down a high-speed pursuit, and I ended up in jail. So when I was in jail, I started looking around and seeing how much these people were not actually like me. Because my grandfather did instill better morals into me. And when he passed away and I didn't get to be there to say goodbye, it really weighed on me. And I wanted to figure out a way that I could do better. If I had missed something because of something I was doing wrong, I wanted to make sure that I could do something right. So I promised myself at that time that I was never going to miss anything important again. So I started working as hard as I could. I fell into entrepreneurship 100% by accident. And I have never intended to build a business, not one. Today I've built 15 businesses. I've sold 9 of them. I did the majority of that stuff in Canada. I had 2 children before I moved to the United States. And I ended up, in 2014, oil field went to zero. And I had built a business from the ground up, and it went to zero. The oil field companies owed us close to $4 million. Ended up having to pay off all that debt because I lived in a small town and I used lots of local subcontractors. Paying off that debt put a lot of stress on my relationship, my life. Ended up getting divorced and starting over. When I looked at the puzzle and asked myself, how could I start over and get back to where I was the fastest, I knew that I needed to be around as many people as possible. So I decided to move to Texas. When I moved to Texas, I had a truck and a horse trailer with a living quarters. Seemed like a good place to be. I have the trailer, right? When I moved to Texas, some friends of mine had offered me to buy their business from them on an owner finance. That was the appealing part that brought me here. And when I got there, the business had been a tax shelter for over 10 years. We didn't know if it could make any money. But after a few months, I had it turned around. It was making money, and my great friends that convinced me to move to Texas decided they no longer wanted to sell the business. So here I was, no business. Sorry? No business and no place to live, and I had the trailer at least. So a few weeks later, my trailer gets repossessed, and now I just have my truck. At that point, I was feeling the same desperation as I did through my divorce, the thing that brought me down here. I happened to meet somebody that helped me start a business while living in my truck. I was able to build that business into the point where it was a big enough pain in the butt for my friends that they decided to buy me out. And with that money, I was able to reinvest it into a live production company. Those live productions, we were doing shows, freestyle motocross and bull riding. And the first show we put on was a hit. So I decided that I should take all the money that I made, all my savings, and invest it into more venues. We got venues in 12 states, and that took just about all the money that I had saved. And a couple weeks later, COVID hit. So here I am, again, starting over. The venues weren't giving back my money, so I lost, all my savings in these venues, starting over again. But I knew that if I just woke up and tried, something would happen. I get a phone call from a friend, and they're asking for 3-ply face masks. I'm sure you guys all know what those are. It was a fashion statement at one point for all of us. And he asked if I could help him find face masks. I said, I know nothing about face masks. I wish I could help, but I know nothing about this. I literally hung up the phone. 30 seconds later, another friend of mine called me and said, hey, I've got this shipping container of face masks. Do you know where to sell them? So I asked him, what's in it for me? I need to feed my family right now. I have no idea what's going on. He told me he'd give me $60,000 if I could sell these face masks. I called friend number one, said, hey, I've got these face masks. This is what I'm selling them for, completely transparent. I'm going to make $60,000 on this deal. Are you okay with it? He said, well, I'm actually going to bill 100% of what you bill me, plus double to the oil field company, so you charge me whatever you feel fit. So I saw these face masks. That one deal of selling face masks turned into a business where I ended up getting a contract with the state of California, and I sold over 40 million face masks that year, doing over $10 million in net profits, not knowing where I was even going to live at the beginning of the year. Or I guess at the beginning of the year before. All of that was going on. I walked into a warehouse that we were importing these in from China, and it was empty. So I ended up deciding that I was going to build a manufacturing facility. Now, if anybody bought safety products from H-E-B, wipes, anything during COVID, I made all that for all of H-E-B stores across Texas. And that year, we went from 0 to $46 million in revenue. In the middle of that, or about 18 months into that journey, my daughter, who was now 6 at the time, called me and asked her if I could teach her how to read. And I couldn't. I didn't graduate. I'm not a very good reader even today, but I couldn't teach her. And that was the first thing that she had asked me in over 18 months. And I hadn't seen her, I hadn't tucked her in bed, I hadn't given her a hug. And she just asked if I could teach her how to read. It rocked my soul to the point where I decided that night that I was selling my business to my other 2 partners and going to figure out how to build a reading software company. That's why I got asked to be here today, was because Carl knew that I was in the education space. So I sell my business, decide that I'm going to build a reading software company, not knowing what I was going to do, but just knowing that if I showed up, I'd figure it out. Here we are 4 years later. We're getting ready to shut down again because selling into the school systems are completely impossible. And I asked God, because I'm fully engaged in my relationship with God at this point, if this is what you truly want me to do. I've kept it alive for 4 years with no money because I spent the first $1 million building the software, not knowing what I was doing. Kept it alive for 4 years. If this is truly what you want me to do, I need you to give me a sign. The next day, we get a Boys and Girls Club to sign a contract with us that gave us our first 500 students for that product. Over the last 3 months, we've onboarded over 3,000 students in after-school reading programs. So I'm telling you all this because I have not, for 1 minute in my life, had a plan on what I was going to do. But the day that that rope broke, I knew that I was put on this earth for something bigger than me. And when I was introduced into teaching kids how to read, I truly felt like that was my purpose. So every day I wake up knowing that I have been given that step at that time to learn something, to bring value to people outside of myself to a cause that's way bigger than I could possibly be. And if you dive into literacy and how important literacy is, you can see that it actually affects every part of the way we live our lives. if a child cannot read, they have a higher probability of going to jail. And a stat that I learned when I was doing research on building EdSoma is that they actually predict how many prison cells are going to be needed in 10 years based off third grade reading levels. And that scared the crap out of me. And then following that rabbit hole, I found out that if you increase literacy by just 2 grade levels in the prison system, you go from an 87% chance of reoccurring down to an 18% chance of reoccurring. And that there's actually studies that show that we lose $2.2 trillion a year in GDP by the levels of our literacy rates in America. This is supposed to be the most powerful, biggest country in the world, but the majority of our country can't read the basic fundamental of going to school. So in learning all this, I decided that I needed to surround myself with the smartest people in education. So I started a podcast. It's called The Business of Education, where every week I do a show where I try and find the best people in class that are doing amazing work in their field. And that's how I met our next guest, MacKenzie Price. She is the CEO and founder of Alpha Schools, and I'd like to welcome her on the stage.
Tell this is going to be probably the most fun South by Southwest interaction that I have. It's so fun to be surrounded by believers who are thinking about something kind of bigger and beyond, especially in a town full of hipsters. So it's that. So thanks for joining. It's small but mighty. So I appreciate it. Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming on. So I'm always doing research, trying to find people that are leading the education space and thinking outside the box. In my opinion, I felt like the education system hasn't changed dramatically in over 100 years. And my favorite place to find good gossip is Instagram. And MacKenzie pops up on my story, and she was just fresh off of Good Morning America?
The Today Show, maybe.
The Today Show, Today Show. So I started doing some research. And she was local right here in Austin, and she does a school called Alpha School that focuses on 2-hour learning. I'm not going to butcher it for it, but I'm going to let her introduce what she does. MacKenzie, tell us a little bit about Alpha School.
Absolutely. So I always love getting interaction from the crowd, and I'm curious if any of you were good students when you were growing up. Any good students? Okay. I was a great student growing up. I was really good at figuring out how to get the A's. But next question, did any of you hate school like I did? I hated school. I was that kid who was always raising my hand and being like, I'm sorry, why do I need to know this? Like, I do not need to know this. I won't do it. Now, how about those rebels in the crowd who were not great at school? Did we have any of those? Not great at school. I look back and I think, I was considered a success story because I did well in school. I got to go to Stanford University. But when I walked out of school, I didn't feel like that, I can't even do the math of K through college, right? 17 years of school didn't bring me any closer to the intersection of my passions and my talents. It's just something I checked the box and did. Anyways, fast forward a few years, it was time for my girls to go to school. And my husband and I sent them down the block to our local public school district here in Austin, which is actually considered the best one in Texas. And very quickly, I just found that there was this lack of ability to provide any sort of personalization to school. And about halfway through my oldest daughter's second grade year, we were having a conversation, and she said, I don't want to go to school tomorrow. And I said, what do you mean you love school? And she looked at me and she said, school is so boring. And I just had this moment of like, oh my gosh, in 2.5 years, they've taken a kid who's like tailor-made to want to be a goody two-shoe school lover, and they've wiped that passion away. And I knew something had to change. I went and met with our local principal, and I'd been bugging her quite a bit over that few-year period, and she finally just looked at me and she said, MacKenzie, I totally understand, but this is like trying to steer the Titanic. We just can't do it. And, it made me realize it wasn't about the teachers at that school or that particular school or moving to a private school. It was the model of education, the one that's been around for 200 years since the Industrial Revolution, teacher in front of a classroom model. And for 40 years, learning science from Harvard and Stanford and Oxford have said, students can learn 2, 5, 10 times faster in basically a one-to-one mastery environment. And every single one of those papers starts or ends with, this is not possible in a teacher in front of the classroom example. So I realized I'm not a homeschool parent. I didn't want to homeschool my kids, so I decided to start my own school. And so in 2014, I started my first school. And the idea behind it is that kids can crush their academics in only 2 hours a day. They can actually learn twice as much as kids in a traditional classroom by getting personalized academic coaching. We do that through, scary word, an AI tutor. And then, because it doesn't take all day to sit around in class, we spend the rest of the school day doing life skills development, financial literacy, and public speaking, and teamwork, and communication, and socialization skills, all of those kinds of things. And then on top of that, we've transformed the role of the teacher in our classrooms. Instead of having to focus on creating lesson plans and delivering lectures and grading homework, our teachers' 100% focus is motivational and emotional support, getting to know every single kid, understanding what makes them tick, understanding when they're struggling or frustrated, what are the things they say to themselves, and how can we incorporate growth mindset strategies for them, and help them find that intersection of their passions and talents. So now we've got several schools around the country, and we've got a bunch of different models. We've been doing private schools. Now we're moving into the charter world. I'm already getting beat up by the public system, but it's fun to do, and it's really been just kind of the great adventure of my life.
Well, I appreciate that. One of the things that caught my eye so much when I was looking through your guys' social media was the kids and how happy they sounded and how excited they are, and then listening to their stories. The one that caught my attention, I think the kid he looked like the same age as my children, 10 or 11 years old, and he had already owned his own Airbnb company that was part of a project that you guys do at your school.
Yeah, so we have kind of an overriding philosophy that guides everything that we do, which is that kids are limitless, and it's the school's job to build an environment that helps unlock their potential. And then we have 3 commitments. One, that kids will love school. And when we say love school, we actually survey our students every 6 weeks and say, do you love school, yes or no? This last session, which ended 2 weeks ago, we got 96% of our students said they love school. But we actually take it even further. We'll say, would you rather go to school or go on vacation? And we were at 66% this last session, would rather go to school than go on to summer camp or go on vacation or that. And then, of course, that they'll learn twice as fast in 2 hours, and they'll learn life skills. And so the question, when we kind of sat down years ago and said, like, let's reimagine school, the question we asked was, how high is high? Like, what are kids capable of doing? And for our 5th and 6th graders last year, the answer was they were able to run their own Airbnb. And that started with just the conversation around, what is an Airbnb? Is it good for the world? Is it bad for the world? What does it mean for short-term housing? Things like that. Then do you buy or do you rent? What clientele are you going to be serving? Are you going for bachelor parties? Are you going for families? Are you downtown Austin? Are you up in the Domain? How are you decorating your place? Are you doing a pull-out sofa couch, or are you doing a big lounger? And then, of course, pricing, customer service, booking, all of those things. And so Byron, who's the kid you probably saw on there, he was one of the kids that got to be a part of this thing. They turned a profit. They signed a year lease. It came up in October. They were fully booked all summer. And this year, our 5th and 6th graders have launched a food truck. And so these kids are getting real world experience. And one of the things that we found, and Kyle, you seem to be the poster child for understanding how much you can learn through entrepreneurship. And we give our students plenty of options to do that, starting in kindergarten. They're working on building businesses. And we also encourage kind of financial literacy. We actually do something kind of crazy. We pay our students for their academic performance. So they get a school currency, and they learn to earn. They learn to invest, they learn to spend, they learn to save, and they learn to donate. And that starts from kindergarten and moves kind of all the way up. And so by the time our kids get to high school, they're working on real businesses. We had a student last year who raised $3.2 million and built Texas's largest mountain bike park that's doing about $50K a month in gross revenue. We have, a student who created a documentary around cancer and its connection to epigenetics. It's had over 5 million views in just under a year. We have a student this year who is creating a musical that is going to get on Broadway that is entirely created and produced by teenagers that she has sourced from around the country. She just performed a sold-out show on Broadway in New York City last month, and she's coming back again, written up there. And all of that to say, kids are capable of doing so much when you provide an environment where they have high expectations of them and high support. And again, to be clear, the central to the success of our model is that role of the adult in the building to focus on motivation. One thing that's kind of interesting, Kyle, is in traditional school, kids who do well in school, it's usually based on if they're smart, IQ, and then level of conscientiousness. Like, are they willing to check the boxes and dot the I's and cross the T's and turn in their homework and study for the test? And if a kid doesn't do well in school, it's kind of the kid's fault. At our schools, we believe that if a kid is not successful in school, it's the system's fault. It means that we're not motivating that child correctly and we're not doing something. And I think that's part of what's led to the success that we've had.
One of the things that I really loved about what you guys were doing was meeting the students where they're at. Typically, I never talk to somebody that comes on the show prior to it, but fortunately, I was able to visit with MacKenzie last week, so I still have all of her information really fresh. But the thing that I thought was really unique was a young female student that when you guys asked what she thinks about and does in her spare time, she says swipe TikTok and think about boys. And then how you guys worked with her to, as risky as this sounds, turn this into a business.
Yeah, one of the big things is, again, I think so often we as parents will make the mistake of putting something on our children that we believe they should want to do, right? You should get interested in this, you should do this. And we kind of take the opposite approach, which is find that thing that kids are interested in and then figure out how to stoke that passion. So the student that you mentioned at the beginning of her freshman year, one of our guides was sitting down talking to her and said, what do you want to work on for a project? She's like, I don't know. I have no idea. And they're like, well, what do you like to do in your spare time? And she goes, scroll TikTok and think about boys. And now 2 years later, she has built a safe teen dating chatbot and a dating app that she has monetized that gives safe and healthy teen dating advice that she can go out to kids for. And it's built on a second brain. She used AI to code this. It's built on a second brain full of research from psychologists and therapists and sociologists that give this. And as much as I have 2 daughters who are 19 and 17, and I would love it if they always came to me for all of their dating advice, but we can't always count on that. And I know I don't necessarily want them going to their friends for that kind of stuff, and she's built this thing. So it's a perfect example of taking an interest that I think a lot of teachers would be like, I have no idea what to do with that, and instead saying, let's go figure out how to get you excited. And that young woman is so driven and so passionate and interested, and she's literally like, look what I get to spend my time doing.
One of the things that's kind of a scary word, especially in education, is AI in education. The reason I do these is because I own an AI tutoring company that teaches kids how to read, and getting that through a teacher's, or that thought process with the teacher for them to align on it and not know that it's going to replace their job, and we have no intentions of trying to replace their job. Ultimately, what that goal of the AI is to free up more time. What are some of the programs you guys use AI for, and how is that driving your school?
Yeah, so first of all, from an academic perspective, what we're doing is every single kid in our school gets a one-to-one mastery-based tutoring experience. So it is literally like having a tutor that the kid is actively engaged with, answering questions, getting spaced repetition, getting regular quizzing to make sure they understand. In a typical lecture environment like what we're doing now, you're going to walk out of this room, and as charming and compelling as Kyle and I are, you're only going to remember about 5% of what was talked about. But in this environment we can do this mastery learning, but what's even cooler about it that AI allows us to do is we can take a student wherever they come to us, and we can assess very accurately what they know and what they don't know, and then we can fill holes in. So you guys probably saw only a third of US students are able to read or do math at grade level right now. It just came out this last month. So we can take that 5th grade student who comes into us at a 2nd grade math or reading level, and we can hit them with that level of content, fill holes, and get them learning faster. Last spring, as an example, we had 4 students who came to us. They were 6th graders. They were all 3 to 4 grade levels behind in all of their subjects. In just under 4 months, they went up 3 grade levels. And that's all the benefit of targeted material that's at the appropriate pace and level, as well as motivation models. And in that case, you know what we did for motivation? You guys will hate this. We let them play 45 minutes of video games in the afternoon, and that was enough to be like, what do I need to do to make this happen? And so, yeah, that's kind of the beauty of it. That's how we use AI in the morning. And then in the afternoon, for life skills development, instead of teaching kids that AI is something that you got to stay away from, or if you do, it's because you're cheating, we use it as a tool. And so, for example, you know, public speaking, there's incredible AI tools that can give feedback on the quality of your speech, your intonation, your positivity, your emotion, your number of filler words, your pacing and speed. It gives feedback in a really unintimidating way, and then goes from there. Kids are making business plans and getting feedback. It's really helped our writing curriculum because our kids have kind of been trained that their first iteration is never their final version, and so they can use AI to get feedback on how they can create more compelling stories, research papers, tweets, essays, emails, those kinds of things. And so I think what we're really doing fundamentally is we're using artificial intelligence to raise human intelligence with regard to their academics and life skills performance, and then allowing our teachers to do what they really got into the business to do, which is positively impact students. And so it's allowed them to focus on what only humans can do, which is that personal interaction and getting to know each kid.
That's amazing. I was telling my wife after we met and my son about some of your programs that are actually go on and help them with sports and e-gaming, and my son was willing to sign up for e-gaming classes or the sports stuff right away. He thought that would be amazing. But recently, where my kids go to school, so not my son's school, he goes to the Christian school in Weatherford, but the public school around there decided that they wanted to go to a 4-day work or a 4-day school week. And ultimately, all the parents thought that this sounded like an amazing idea. But then after structuring the schedule, it didn't make it shorter. The kids come in earlier and stay later, Monday to Thursday, and get Friday off. So what is school doing, in your opinion, that is making them have to be there for that long? We all know that your kids are thriving with 2 hours of curriculum a day. What are other schools doing that you think we could maybe do a little bit different to help those schools thrive as well?
Well, unfortunately, that also adds another challenge, which is school is a bundle, right? It's also a daycare. So those parents who have to figure out, now what do I do on Friday? Because my work didn't go to a 4-day work week, right? What do they do on that? It's also about socialization, right? There's tons of connection on that. But if you guys think about, if I polled you and said, what makes a better school? I think you guys would say the same thing. You'd go, well, you have to have better teacher training. And a lot of times people say more time. You need to spend more time. And if you look at the last 25 years in education, our funding has gone up in schools. Our teacher ratios have gone, student-teacher ratios have gone down. Our training has gone up, and results have continued to plummet. That's not the answer. And again, I think it fundamentally comes down to that teacher in front of a classroom model is broken. It doesn't work. It's inefficient. And instead of tiptoeing into this world of, we're going to use a little bit of technology in a certain way, and we're going to do this, I chose to kind of go all in, and we don't have a hybrid approach. It's not like, probably if any of you are parents, a lot of times we get parents who will say, oh, well, my kids use some apps, a couple times a week, they go and do 15 minutes in Khan Academy. The problem is you're still plopping yourself back into that 5th grade math class that goes from September to May, and it doesn't really help. So unfortunately, that's the challenge that's happening, and education is kind of the last industry that has not been disrupted in 200 years, and I will say I don't think there's ever been a more exciting time to be a 5-year-old, and there's never been a better time to be a teacher, because I think the next 5 years is going to be really exciting and enlightening.
No, I can't agree with you more. One of the things that, so I'm always wanting to learn. I watch a lot of entrepreneur podcasts. I'm trying to, fill in areas where I feel weak. And, quite often, if you're watching some sort of motivational podcast, they always say that you are a direct representation of the 10 people you hang out with the most. So with that in mind, I was curious how you said your schools are growing, how it is for new kids coming into school that may not be used to this concept or model. How do they adapt to coming in and changing, ultimately flipping their whole experience on its head?
Yeah. Well, one thing I will say that I'm very proud of is we're a private school model for the most part, and most private schools have kids take tests. They take IQ tests. They have to show transcripts, grades. And what's really sad about that is by 3rd grade, kids are written off. It's like he's not the sharpest kid. He's an average student. And as you mentioned with reading, if you're a C student in 3rd grade, your chances of graduating high school on time go down. Your chances of getting a 4-year diploma go down. It's a really big issue. And so at our schools, we don't care where a kid comes in, because again, we can meet them wherever they're at. But the other thing that's really fun to watch is when a kid comes into our environment, joins our school, they'll often put on the costume that they had at their old school, which is like, oh, what's cool is to heckle, or to like kind of goof off. And very quickly, what they realize is that the other kids are kind of like, yeah, that doesn't actually roll so well here. Like, we're really engaged. We're doing these things. And what's beautiful about it is eventually these kids will kind of realize, like, it's like they take a big sigh of relief where they're like, oh, I don't have to, posture. I don't have to worry about being with the cool kids or, the sporty kids or whatever. I can kind of be who I want. We've also created a culture where kids have a lot of ownership in the culture. And what we found is when you give kids ownership and you don't do this top-down hierarchy structure, they raise themselves and each other to a higher standard in terms of behavior. And that's a really, really cool thing to see. And one of the things I'll never forget, when my oldest daughter was in 7th grade, there had been a boy who transferred from our local public school, and he was a cool kid, football player, cute. My daughter totally had a crush on him. And, but he was he had moved because he wasn't doing well in school. And my daughter, I picked her up from school one day, and she said, Mom, you won't believe it. She said, Tommy got 100 on this assessment. And in front of all of us in the classroom, he called his mom crying and said, Mom, I'm not dumb. I'm not dumb. And not only was it beautiful to see his confidence arise, which we believe confidence comes from competence. The better you are at math, the more you're like, I kind of like math. This is fun. But the fact that he was willing to call his mom crying in front of all his friends, talking about, like, I'm so proud of myself. And it was a really beautiful thing. So I think it seems like what we're able to help instill in kids is a stronger sense of self and a stronger sense of also values of just working hard, put in the effort. It's not about how smart you are. It's just about putting in the work. And I think those are skills that most all of us would agree are what will make us successful in life.
I couldn't agree more. One of the things that I've learned a lot by being able to do these podcasts and interview people like yourself is that a lot of kids that struggle with school actually have some sort of emotional blockage that's going on. So it's not just getting them to go to school and improve. They've got to get over the anxiety of going into school knowing that they're not at that level, being around peers that potentially can make fun of them. That was where I fell out with school, was that I couldn't read well. And I knew going to school was ultimately going to resort to me being made fun of on the playground. So how do you guys deal with that mental and emotional part, bringing kids into school, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we all understand what a big difference, home life makes for kids, what they're doing, and that's where, again, the role of our teachers, instead of having to be so focused on a lot of bureaucratic stuff or trying to figure out how to take a whole group of you and teach every one of you, our teachers are able to spend their time figuring out what's going on with that student, understanding, hey, what's happening at home that might be causing distraction or stress or whatever. Again, a lot of the self-talk that kids give to each other. And then even just, again, from a motivational perspective, our guides know, hey, this kid is really affirmed when you give him words of affirmation. This kid loves privileges. This kid is obsessed with birds, and when he hits his goals for the week, he gets to earn time to go bird watching with his guide out in our back green belt. One of my favorite ones, we had a little girl who's a kindergarten student last year, and every time she would hit one of her academic goals, she and her guide would go in the corner and do a 15-second Taylor Swift dance party. And that was enough to get that little girl like, give me the next problem. Let me go on the next of it. And just being seen, being able to know that your teacher is there. One of the questions we ask our students every session, every 6 weeks, besides love of school, for our younger students, we say, do you love your guide? Yes or no? But for our older students, we ask a little bit different question. We say, every adult would say that they have one or two teachers that changed their life. Would that be true for you? Raise your hand if you had one or two teachers. Raise your hand if you had more than two teachers who changed your life. Think about, by the way, how many teachers we all went through. I had two teachers, but that's it in all the teachers that I had. And so we ask our students, every adult had one or two teachers that changed your life. Is your guide that person for you? And what we get is in the 80s that our students will say that. And that right there is the key. And if you think about it from trying to be accessible and equitable to every single population, I think it's important across the board, right? Because kids are dealing with so many struggles, and they need that mentor and that person who's on their side and in their corner and has time. In fact, I just read a study, the average K through 8 public school teacher gets 22 seconds of one-on-one time with their students each day. That's it.
Wow, that's crazy. One of the things that when I decided to build EdSoma, I knew that we needed to stay very apolitical because the political landscape is very nasty, and all I knew is that whether they're conservative or Democratic children, they all needed to read. That was all I knew. So I've always stayed very apolitical, and that kind of puts you in a position with little things you can talk about, things you can't talk about, things you try to avoid. One of the things in trying to get everybody to adopt a program and like yours and like what I have is not pushing our faith and religion on them. We're all here to talk with faith-based entrepreneurs. How do you get to sneak your passion and your faith into what you do and guide that, knowing that you can't push it on to the kids going through your classrooms?
Yeah. So I became a Christian in 2011. I grew up much like you. My mom was married 3 times. My dad was in prison. I had kind of I went a little bit from Cinderella and rags to Cinderella and riches when my mom finally married a good guy. Mm-hmm. And so I had kind of a weird childhood. I grew up sort of going to church just because my grandparents were going to make sure I got confirmed. So as soon as I got to college, it was like, thank goodness I'm done with that and I can sleep in now. Didn't really think much more of it. And then when my husband and I met, I remember having a conversation where it's like, are you Christian? And yes, we are. But that was just like, are you white and are you a female? Like if someone had come up to me and said, are you a believer? I would have been like, whoa, that sounds weird, right? Or are you a Jesus follower? I'd be like, oh, wow, you're definitely weird. So I wasn't there. But we had kind of said like, oh, once you have kids, it's like, we should take them to Sunday school so they get that moral foundation. And really it was free babysitting because otherwise we were hanging out at home early and did that. We hadn't really thought about it. But one thing that happened that was so interesting is the moment that I got pregnant with my oldest daughter, I got hit with this insane feeling of worthlessness. Like there's something that I'm supposed to be doing that I'm not doing. And I remember when I was pregnant, I'd talk to my husband, I'd talk to one of my friends, and I'd be like, I'm supposed to be doing something. And I remember at one point I said, I think I need to get a job. And my friend said, you have a full-time job. You already are working. Plus, you're like making a baby and you're doing this. And I'm like, no, there's something else. And for years, I was plagued with this sense of like worthlessness, like there's something I'm missing. There's something I'm supposed to be doing. And it was a really bad feeling. Well, when I became a Christian, and I had a very strong conversion moment, I literally met Jesus just like this. And so it was like, all right, I'm a Christian now. I have no choice but to be one. I remember thinking, okay, this is my time where I'm just supposed to settle in my identity as a child of God, and that worthlessness should go away, but it kind of kept like nagging me. Well, it was in 2014 that the experience with my daughter happened, and I started the school sort of just by accident. It was like I needed a place for my kids to go to school, and I didn't want to homeschool, so I got to start something. And now I look back all those years later, and do you guys ever get that when you just watch how God's worked in your life, and you're like, I couldn't have written this better? I believe that when I got pregnant, God put that seed in my belly and said, there's something you're going to be doing that is bigger than just this, and I feel like I'm living that purpose, now, and I am, and actually my daughters will sort of be like, gee, Mom, so like being a mom isn't your big purpose? And it's like, no, you're part of it, you're for sure part of it, but I think this is, and education, I think is something that every single person in this room, whether they have kids or not, should care about, right? It's our greatest untapped resource in the world is human potential and education. So I think it's really exciting. So when I think about how I tell my story, and I have a Future of Education on Instagram and YouTube, I've got a lot of followers on there. And again, I do try to stay apolitical because you know how many schools are going crazy, one end or the other or something. And for me, I always bring it back to our 3 commitments: love school, learn twice as fast in 2 hours, and learn life skills. But I also think it's important to be bold and to be able to say, like, I think this is the purpose God has for me. So I will talk about those things. And I think when you see somebody who's living in like authentic pursuit of some greater purpose, it's inspiring to people. And like I said, because I grew up not a Christian, most of my friends are not Christians. And I was talking to one of my friends last week. I had lunch with him, and he goes to a sex swingers club every couple weeks. And I'm like, they exist in the suburbs, apparently. So I have a very wide crowd, but I think when you can talk on a basic level about the idea of truth and about God and then Jesus, like, there's some benefit you can have on that. But I probably should be, well, I don't know if I should be. I get comments and DMs that are like, Future of Education, you should be using this platform to spread the message of Jesus Christ. And I believe all of us are sent to go do different things, and I think maybe, hopefully, the stuff I'm doing in education to help people do that is helping.
I totally know where you're coming from. My office is very deeply rooted in our faith, but part of the mission is to be able to bring kids in and educate them, so you don't want to make them feel unwelcome by setting a boundary. Our goal that I believe I've been given to do, and you feel quite the same, is to make sure that we teach all kids. So giving them those fundamental skills to be able to go on and put them around good-rooted people is the first step. And then that energy will carry over to them, because I didn't hang out with a lot of Christian people at all. I found my path to God through my experience, and those who are here at the beginning to hear my story, it's been very guided. So I just know that by bringing people in and giving them these tools, it's going to ultimately give them the ability to go out and make that decision on their own to become faith-driven or not. But if they don't have those tools, they just get lost. So not educating them, you're giving them the chance to get lost. Bringing them in and giving them an education, you're giving them that chance to find it on their own, which is a very powerful thing as well. Everyone, I want you to thank MacKenzie Price for joining us today.
Thank you, Kyle. Thanks for having me. And are you guys all here for South by, like, all the next week? Well, then go and spread all of that love to everyone who's here. There's a lot of people who need it. I need it too, by the way. So,
thank you, guys.